Take a close look at these neighborhoods. The fences are still familiar, the lawns neatly trimmed, the flag still hanging on the front porch. There are no shouting crowds, no chaos on the evening news. But inside those homes, something very different is unfolding. People are starting to avoid the envelopes sent by the county, not because they're irresponsible, but because they no longer have the strength to answer them. Across the United States, there are places where enforcement has become so sensitive that even local authorities hesitate to step in, not because of crime, but because behind those doors are ordinary families, seniors, teachers, and veterans. The law still exists, but the sense of certainty does not. And this is no longer the story of one state. It's happening in many places at once as a quiet wave spreads beneath the very homes that once felt the safest. Number 1, California. What's happening in California doesn't look like a revolt in the traditional sense. There are no banners, no leaders giving speeches, no crowds gathering in front of government buildings. That's what makes it so hard to see and so dangerous. This revolt is happening one kitchen table at a time, one unopened envelope at a time across neighborhoods that still look perfectly normal from the outside. Property taxes in California have quietly crossed a line. For years, homeowners accepted increases as part of life. But now, reassessments based on market prices have pushed tax bills far beyond what fixed incomes can absorb. Homes haven't changed, lives haven't improved, yet the numbers keep climbing. For retirees living on Social Security or modest pensions, there is no way to catch up. You can't work overtime at 70. You can't renegotiate a pension check. When the math stops working, something has to give, and what's giving way is compliance. County offices are seeing something they were never designed to handle. Not a wave of fraud, not mass protest, but thousands of otherwise law-abiding homeowners are falling behind at the same time. These aren't people who forgot to pay. These are people who ran out of options. When they call to ask for relief, they hear the same answer over and over again. The assessment is correct and there's nothing that can be done. At that point, the conversation ends, but the problem doesn't. This is where California's property tax revolt takes shape. Quietly, systematically, people don't announce what they're doing. They simply stop responding. One mispayment turns into two. Penalties stack up. Files begin to pile on desks inside county buildings. And suddenly enforcement becomes a question no one wants to answer, because who exactly are you supposed to go after? Behind those addresses are retired teachers who paid into the system for decades. Veterans who served came home, worked, and believed they had earned stability. Nurses, electricians, small business owners who followed the rules and trusted that ownership meant security. Treating them like tax criminals isn't just politically risky, it's morally explosive. That's why even law enforcement finds itself stuck in the middle. Officers understand that enforcing property tax laws at scale would mean knocking on doors where the problem isn't refusal but impossibility. Many of them are homeowners, too. Many are facing rising tax bills themselves. When enforcement starts to look like punishment for aging, for illness, or for simply staying put too long, the line between law and injustice becomes dangerously thin. So instead of decisive action, there's hesitation, delays, quiet extensions, files that sit unresolved, not because the law disappeared, but because applying it as written would tear through entire communities. California isn't lawless. It's stuck. The impact doesn't stop at tax offices. It seeps into everyday decisions. People stop fixing their homes, afraid that any improvement will trigger another reassessment. They delay doctor visits, cut back on essentials, drain savings meant for the last chapter of life. Some quietly list their homes for sale, not because they want to leave, but because they're trying to escape before the system forces them out. This is how displacement begins in modern America, not with eviction notices, but with pressure, not with tents, but with spreadsheets. By the time people are visibly homeless, the damage has already been done. California is showing what that first stage looks like when people still have roofs over their heads, but no longer feel safe beneath them. And this is why California matters so much. Not because it's uniquely broken, but because it's ahead of the curve. High home values, heavy reliance on property tax, and a large retiree population have collided here first. What's unfolding now is a preview, not an exception. If a system can't enforce its own rules without destabilizing the very people it depends on, then something fundamental has shifted. California is no longer just dealing with rising taxes. It's dealing with a quiet refusal rooted in survival. And once that kind of revolt starts, it doesn't announce itself. It spreads. The real question isn't whether California can contain this. It's how many other states are already closer to this point than anyone wants to admit. Number 2, Texas. Texas is often held up as an example of a low-tax state, a place where people can keep more of what they earn. That reputation has drawn in families, retirees, and workers from across the country. But what many don't realize until they've settled in is that when a state doesn't collect income tax, it has to fund its services another way. In Texas, that burden falls heavily on property taxes, and it hits homeowners faster and harder than most expect. Local governments in Texas rely on property taxes to keep the system running. Schools, police departments, fire services, and basic infrastructure are all paid for largely through taxes on homes. As long as property values rise slowly, the pressure stays manageable. But when home prices surge, as they have in many parts of Texas over the past few years, property taxes rise with them. The result is a bill that grows year after year. Even though nothing about the home or the homeowner's income has changed for many Texans, especially those on fixed or semi-fixed incomes, that gap becomes overwhelming very quickly. A house that once felt affordable suddenly carries a tax bill that rivals a monthly rent payment. Families who move to Texas for lower costs find themselves squeezed from a different direction. Retirees who plan to age in place discover that the state's low tax promise doesn't apply once the market heats up. This is where Texas reflects a broader pattern spreading across the country. Throughout the United States, property tax is no longer a stable, predictable obligation. It has become a rising cost tied to housing markets rather than to real incomes. Home values are climbing faster than wages. Local governments are leaning more heavily on property taxes to support their budgets and inflation. Insurance premiums and everyday living costs are rising at the same time. Homeowners are left with less room to breathe. When the cost of staying in one place rises faster than the ability to live there, people don't take to the streets, they pull back. In Texas, that reaction is quiet and personal. Homeowners delay a payment, hoping the next month will be easier. Savings meant for emergencies get redirected to cover taxes. Over time, these small decisions add up, and county offices begin to notice something unusual. Not fraud, not organized resistance, but a growing number of otherwise responsible homeowners are falling behind. At the same time, the people affected aren't reckless or unwilling to contribute. They are young families trying to build stability and older residents trying to hold on to it. Many believed that choosing Texas meant choosing predictability. Instead, they are learning that lower taxes in one area can mean higher pressure in another, especially when housing prices rise faster than paychecks. The longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to address. Local governments need the revenue to function, but enforcing the law more aggressively risks pushing ordinary people out of their homes. Just like in other states, the challenge isn't a lack of rules. It's the growing gap between what the system demands and what people can realistically afford. Texas shows how quickly that balance can tip. A state known for affordability becomes a place where homeowners feel trapped between rising values and rising bills. It's not a loud revolt, and it doesn't make headlines every night, but it is part of the same quiet shift happening across America, where property tax is no longer just a bill to pay, but a test of whether staying put is still possible. Number 3, Florida. What happens when the place you chose for peace, sunshine, and retirement suddenly becomes the hardest place to hold on to a home? For many people in Florida, that question is no longer theoretical. It's showing up in their mailboxes, their insurance notices, and their bank statements. Month after month, Florida's problem isn't just property tax, it's a double hit. On one side, property taxes keep rising as home values climb, fueled by waves of new arrivals from other states. On the other side, home insurance costs have exploded. Hurricanes are stronger and more frequent. Claims are piling up, and insurance companies are pulling out or sharply raising premiums. For homeowners, especially retirees, the cost of simply staying put has surged from two directions at once. For years, Florida marketed itself as a retirement haven. No state income tax, warm weather, and relatively affordable housing made it feel like a safe landing spot for people living on fixed incomes. But that promise is quietly unraveling. Insurance premiums that once felt manageable have doubled or tripled. Some homeowners are being dropped entirely and forced into last resort policies at staggering prices. At the same time, property taxes rise as neighborhoods become more desirable and more expensive on paper, even if the people living there haven't seen their income change at all. For retirees, this combination is devastating. Social Security checks don't grow with insurance premiums. Pensions don't adjust when taxes spike. Many people plan their retirement around predictable costs, only to find those numbers shifting beneath their feet. The house hasn't changed, their lifestyle hasn't changed, but the cost of being allowed to stay keeps climbing. This pressure forces impossible choices. Do you pay the insurance bill or the property tax first? Do you cut back on health care to cover housing costs? Do you dip into savings meant to last the rest of your life, knowing there may be no way to rebuild them? And when those savings start to run thin, what comes next? More and more Florida homeowners are answering that question by selling, not because they want to move, but because they feel they have no other option. Homes that were meant to be the final stop are quietly put on the market. People leave communities they built, friends they relied on, and doctors they trust, all because the math no longer works. Florida isn't pushing people out with eviction notices, it's pricing them out with compounding costs. Local governments are caught in the middle. Rising property values bring higher tax revenue, which helps fund services, but higher taxes layered on top of soaring insurance costs create a breaking point for residents. Enforcing every rule to the letter risks accelerating an exodus of the very people who once formed the backbone of these communities. Florida now represents a warning, not a refuge. A place once seen as a guaranteed safe harbor for retirement has become a test of endurance. The question many homeowners are quietly asking isn't whether they love Florida. It's whether they can afford to keep loving it, and if a retirement paradise can turn this quickly into a high-risk place to hold on to a home. What does that say about the future of housing security anywhere else? Number 4, New York. In New York, the crisis doesn't arrive with warning signs or sudden collapse. It arrives quietly through rising bills that no longer match the lives of the people receiving them. This is a city long defined by endurance, where people believed that if they could hold on long enough, stability would follow. But today, many older New Yorkers are discovering that time, loyalty, and decades of residence no longer protect them from being pushed out. The pressure begins with a combination that is uniquely heavy here: high property taxes layered on top of some of the highest living costs in the country. For years, homeowners accepted that New York would never be cheap. They planned around it. They adjusted their lifestyles. Many paid off their mortgages and believed that would be the turning point. Instead, they are now facing tax bills and everyday expenses that rise faster than any fixed income can handle. For seniors who have lived in the same home for 30 or 40 years, the shock is profound. These are not newcomers chasing opportunity. These are people who built their lives here, raised families here, and paid into the system for decades. Yet the neighborhood around them has changed. Property values have soared and taxes have followed. The house may be the same, but the cost of staying inside it has become unbearable. What makes New York especially unforgiving is that selling the house doesn't solve the problem. Many older homeowners assume that cashing out will finally bring relief, but when they look elsewhere, they find that high taxes and high costs follow them. Moving to another part of the state, or even another state entirely, often means trading one set of financial pressures for another. The idea of a comfortable reset quietly disappears. Number 5, New Jersey. How long can a family keep paying more and more before managing quietly turns into giving up entirely? In New Jersey, that question has been hanging in the air for years. Property taxes here have been the highest in the country for as long as many residents can remember. People learned to live with it, to budget around it, and to believe that this was simply the price of staying. But when home values began to rise even further, the system revealed a hard truth. There was no brake built in. Taxes didn't slow down or level off. They stacked on top of what was already heavy. For middle-class families, this wasn't a single shocking bill that triggered panic. It was a long, grinding pressure that crept up year after year, wearing people down without making headlines. Homes didn't suddenly improve. Incomes didn't suddenly jump. Yet each year, the tax bill arrived higher than the last. Families who once thought they could absorb just one more increase found themselves repeating that thought until there was nothing left to adjust. Savings were drained, retirement timelines were pushed back. What once felt tight slowly became unsustainable. This is why the revolt in New Jersey doesn't look loud or sudden. It looks like endurance is finally running out. People aren't storming government buildings. They're doing something far more decisive. They're leaving. Teachers, office workers, and longtime homeowners are packing up, not in search of luxury, but in search of breathing room. New Jersey isn't forcing people out with eviction notices. It's pushing them out through years of accumulated strain. This is a revolt born from overload, not shock. When high property taxes become a permanent condition and rising values add even more weight, the result isn't collapse, it's erosion. And New Jersey is showing what happens when a place slowly becomes too expensive for the middle class that once sustained it. Number 6, Illinois. In Illinois, the pressure doesn't come from sudden growth or booming demand. It comes from debt. Years of budget shortfalls at the state and city level have created a system that is constantly trying to patch holes. And for many homeowners, property tax has become the tool used to do it. What people are feeling now isn't just higher bills. It's the sense that they are being asked to pay for mistakes they didn't make. State and local governments in Illinois are struggling to balance their books. Pension obligations, infrastructure costs, and long-standing fiscal mismanagement have left budgets stretched thin. Instead of structural reform, the fastest way to close gaps has been to lean harder on property taxes. As a result, homeowners see their tax bills rise even when services don't noticeably improve. For many families, this feels deeply unfair. Their homes haven't changed, their incomes haven't kept pace. Yet year after year, property taxes climb to cover deficits that were created long before them. This isn't about growth or opportunity. It's about plugging financial leaks, and homeowners are the ones holding the bucket. The emotional impact is just as strong as the financial one. People don't feel like they're contributing to a shared future. They feel like they're settling old debts on behalf of a broken system. That erodes trust. When residents believe the rules are no longer designed to be fair, compliance starts to weaken, not out of rebellion, but out of disillusionment. In Illinois, the response isn't loud, it's weary. Payments are delayed, appeals increase. Conversations shift from how do we manage this to why are we still here. Families who once planned to stay are now weighing whether leaving is the only way to regain control of their finances. This is why the property tax revolt in Illinois carries a different tone. It isn't driven by sudden shock or rapid change. It's driven by a loss of faith. When people feel that their taxes are no longer funding stability, but covering past failures, the social contract begins to crack. Number 7, Colorado. What happens when a place grows so fast that the people who built it can no longer afford to stay? In Colorado, that question is becoming impossible to ignore. Cities are expanding at a pace that feels exciting from the outside, but unsettling for those who have lived there the longest. Home values across Colorado have surged far ahead of wages. While incomes have risen slowly, housing prices have jumped sharply, and property taxes have followed. In just a few years, many homeowners are facing tax bills that feel completely out of sync with their day-to-day reality. The house hasn't changed, but the cost of keeping it has. For longtime residents, this shift feels deeply personal. They watch their towns grow from quiet communities into booming destinations. They supported development and welcomed newcomers. What they didn't expect was that the very growth they embraced would turn against them. As assessments climb, they're taxed as if they're cashing in on the boom. Even though their paychecks and pensions haven't moved, that pressure slowly reshapes everyday life. People postpone repairs, scale back spending, and rethink retirement plans just to stay afloat. Some begin to wonder whether holding on makes sense anymore, even when leaving was never part of their future. The feeling isn't panic, but unease, a sense that the ground is shifting too quickly to regain balance. Colorado's story reveals a larger risk hidden inside rapid growth. Development doesn't just change skylines, it changes who belongs. When home values surge faster than wages, property taxes become the mechanism that pushes longtime residents to the margins, making room for those who can move faster and pay more. Number 8, Arizona. Arizona isn't being squeezed by high taxes alone, it's being overwhelmed by speed. What was once a relatively affordable state has been transformed by a massive influx of people from other parts of the country. All arriving in a short span of time, new residents bring demand. Prices rise and property taxes follow quickly behind. Home values across Arizona have surged as population growth accelerates. Neighborhoods that barely changed for decades are suddenly reassessed again and again. Each reassessment pushes tax bills higher, not because homeowners are earning more, but because the market around them is moving too fast. For many working households, the numbers simply stop lining up. Middle-income workers are hit hardest. Their wages haven't doubled, but their housing costs often feel like they have. Property tax increases arrive year after year, leaving little time to adjust or plan. What once felt manageable turns unstable almost overnight. This is why Arizona's revolt isn't driven by outrage over extreme tax rates. It's driven by velocity. The system keeps recalculating faster than people can adapt. Homeowners fall behind not because they refuse to pay, but because the pace has outrun their ability to keep up. Arizona shows how rapid population growth can destabilize communities just as effectively as high taxes. When change happens too fast, even moderate tax systems become unbearable. And when speed becomes the enemy, resistance doesn't come loudly. It arrives quietly as people realize they can't keep running forever. Number 9, Oregon. In Oregon, the question people are starting to ask isn't why do we pay taxes, it's why does the burden keep falling on us? Local governments need funding to keep schools open, maintain public services, and support social programs, especially as housing instability and homelessness continue to grow. But instead of spreading that responsibility across multiple revenue sources, much of it ends up landing on homeowners through property taxes. The problem is that as social costs rise, property taxes rise with them, while household incomes do not. For many families, especially retirees, the feeling is unmistakable. On one hand, they're asked to step up for the good of the community. On the other, they're struggling just to hold on to their own homes. Is it fair to ask the people barely hanging on to carry the weight of an overloaded system? Most residents aren't opposed to helping others. What changes is the moment they see next year's tax bill come in higher than the last, even though the house is the same and their life hasn't changed. How much is enough, and where is the breaking point for an average household? That's why the property tax revolt in Oregon isn't loud. It happens quietly in private thoughts, in late payments, in appeal forms filled out at the kitchen table. When compassion is no longer matched by affordability, the question becomes unavoidable. Can a system built on good intentions end up harming the very people who are holding it together? Number 10. Washington. Washington is often seen as a wealthy, forward-looking state powered by technology, innovation, and high-paying industries. But beneath that image lies a growing divide. With no state income tax, Washington relies heavily on property taxes to fund schools, public safety, and local services. As home prices surge, that reliance turns into pressure, especially for people who don't work in tech. In cities and suburbs shaped by the tech boom, property values have climbed at a pace that ordinary wages can't follow. Teachers, city workers, nurses, and even police officers are watching their tax bills rise year after year while their paychecks stay largely the same. On paper, they live in valuable homes. In reality, they're struggling to afford the cost of staying. For longtime residents, the contradiction is painful. Washington is richer than ever, yet many of the people who keep it running feel more financially vulnerable. Property tax increases don't feel like shared progress. They feel like a quiet transfer of burden from a booming economy onto those stuck in the middle. This is why the revolt here feels restrained but deeply unsettling. People aren't angry in the streets. They're anxious at home, recalculating budgets, delaying plans, and wondering how long they can keep up. Washington shows how a state can be economically strong and socially strained at the same time. When wealth grows faster than fairness, even prosperity begins to feel unstable. What's unfolding across these states points to a hard truth. Property tax is no longer just an obligation. It's becoming the price of being allowed to stay in your own home. When pressure rises faster than the ability to live, the response isn't loud, but it runs deep enough to shake the system. If this story feels familiar or reflects what you're seeing around you, tap like and subscribe to Tax Hack Pro so you can stay informed about the changes in housing, taxes, and financial security before the rules shift again in silence. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our daily content. Now, feel free to check out some of the newest and best videos currently shown on your screen. Goodbye and see you in the next video.